Hey, what's up, guys? I'm Sci High, and I want to share a really wild and crazy deck idea that is still kind of in conceptual status, but it's kind of straight out of left field. I was up really late one night and intrigued by a few cards and this kind of kicking around this idea in my head. Started to piece it together in my mind and trying to put a deck list together. But I think we may actually have something pretty incredible going on here. Certainly have to tweak it more and experiment and do some more play testing, but I think this may actually have some serious competitive potential. So if you're into that sort of thing, or deck techs like this, or high level gameplay, consider liking and subscribing. And with that out of the way, let's get right into the deck. So what the hell are we talking about here? Artifact Storm. So this all started from this Dragonspark Reactor. Is a pretty interesting card. One red, one colorless. Whenever a Dragonspark Reactor or another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, put a charge counter on Dragonspark Reactor. For 4 colorless, we can sacrifice Dragonspark Reactor, and then it deals damage equal to the number of charge counters on it to target player, and that much damage to up to 1 creature. So you can 2-for-1 this thing, but most importantly, this thing gets jacked up with counters really, really fast, especially when every single card in the deck is an artifact, and a cheap artifact at that. And especially when we can chain and pseudo go infinite and rifle through our whole deck and just continue to cast artifacts, as I will show you in a moment. But there was a similar card printed a few sets back that cost 3 mana and built up charge counters like this, but it cost 3 mana, and it didn't start with a counter on it, and it didn't trigger on itself either, because it was an artifact and only triggered when you cast instants or sorceries. Now this thing also is an artifact in itself, so the count goes up extremely high, and the ability to also hit a creature can't be understated. That is huge, especially if we're not going for the kill or lethal with this thing, but we just want to maybe take a big chunk off of our opponent's life total and also kill one of their creatures at the same time. And of course we can do that at instant speed, because there's no restriction on activating this ability. We don't have to use it at sorcery speed. We can do it whenever we choose to do it. So this is actually, though, the secondary win con. It can be the primary, but there's really kind of like 2 primary win conditions in this deck. And we'll just cover those first. So we've got this thing to jack up and build charge counters really fast and kind of just bomb our opponent for lethal, or at least half their life total, as quickly as this thing gets jacked up in charge counters. Now, in addition to that, since we are a pure artifact deck, just casting tons of artifacts and getting tons of artifacts into play, we've got Nettlecyst, which is already a proven badass in the format. 3 colorless, it's a living weapon equipment. The equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact or enchantment we control and equip to. So this thing is often huge when it comes into play, because you've got a lot of artifacts. Not uncommon to see this guy as 12/12 and beyond. Easy equip cost, but it's awesome that it comes with the germ and already equipping a creature. So if our opponent's forced to kill the creature, it's totally fine. We still have the Nettlecyst ready to equip another creature. And as we'll see, all of the creatures in this deck have flying, which is huge. So our secondary, or maybe the primary win condition, is Nettlecyst. Just a huge Nettlecyst by itself, or attached to one of our flying creatures and getting in for lethal that way. So this whole deck hinges on really the Reactor and the Nettlecyst. And to exploit these 2 cards, we're going to try to cast and put as many artifacts into play as fast as possible. So to do that, let's start from the ground up and take a look at how this deck works, or at least conceptually how it should work. At the 1-drop spot, we've got 4 Moonsnare Prototypes. New one, of course, quick artifact put into play on turn 1 for 1 blue. Tap an untapped artifact or creature you control to add a colorless. Now, we have a ton of just other non-functional artifacts in this deck that are going to come into play and enable this right away. So this thing functions almost like, you know, a 1 mana rock. I don't know why I say it functions like that, but that's exactly what it does in this deck. It's like a Mind Stone for 1, kind of. But it also has a channel ability, which can be relevant of 5 mana, discarding it. And the owner of target non-land permanent puts it on top or bottom of their library. But anyways, we're not that interested in that. Let's move on to the exciting parts of this deck. So we've got this 1-drop that comes in and is already, you know, building up your mana base and your artifact base to increase the count. We talk about this thing, our primary win condition, building this up and just bombing the opponent for a huge lethal damage. Awesome that it triggers on itself, so you can reactor, you know, and then another reactor triggers whatever reactors you have in play. Now we get to the juicy fun parts. Finally, the other point of this deck and this concept is that this is another new card from Kamigawa. All these intriguing artifact spells that we have now. This is a unique one. Enthusiastic Mechanaut. 1 blue, 1 red, 2/2 flying, not too shabby. But it says artifact spells we cast cost 1 less to cast. This is the cheapest cost reducing for artifacts spell printed in Historic, I believe now. This is previously everything was like 3 or 4 mana to reduce artifacts. Now we have a 2cc card that makes every card in our deck cost 1 less to cast, at least the cards that have colorless in their casting cost. So now that means that our Mind Stones now only cost 1. We've got 4 Mind Stones, just further artifact and ramping up. Again, I'm still playing with all these numbers, so I plan to continue tweaking this and testing and experimenting on what works best. It may so be that I don't feel we need as many Mind Stones. I want more draw spells, but we can talk about that and discuss later. You know, we can all put our heads together and team up on this and try to push this archetype into something actually real. Would be absolutely awesome how cool would that be if we can push this to actually like a tiered status. But let's not get too crazy right away. But I do, again, think there's some potential here. So let's look at more of what's going on here. So we've got 4 Mind Stones. Again, we can reduce everything by 1 now. We've got a ton of cards in this deck that draw you more cards. So the Sleeper Dart is really interesting. 2 colorless. It's just a cantripping artifact. We cast this, we draw a card. But it's got a somewhat useful ability. Tap, sack, to make target creature doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. So you hit it with a Sleeper Dart for a turn. Most of the time, we're not looking to use that ability. We're just using these as cheap artifacts that cantrip. So what you can see going on here, when we have the Enthusiastic Mechanaut and other effects like this, or 2 of these guys in play, suddenly these cantripping artifacts, you know, an artifact that draws a card when it enters the battlefield, we can very easily get these to cast cost 0 and play them for nothing. So to facilitate that, in addition to the Enthusiastic Mechanauts, we also have 4 Foundry Inspectors, 3 colorless, 3/2, that has the exact same effect of artifact spells you cast costs 1 less to cast. So again, a great start. Turn 2 Mechanaut, maybe even ideally you had a turn 1 Prototype, a turn 2 Mechanaut into a turn 3 Inspector, or maybe another Mechanaut, and then immediately, now on turn 3, all of these, the Sleeper Darts and these Wedding Invitations, which is another cantripping artifact, they cost nothing. And you can just start to play these and draw cards for nothing and just start to chain them. As you're doing this, you're getting deeper in your deck, you're drawing more cards, you're finding more relevant things, but you're also building up your artifact count. You're littering so much material on the battlefield and so many artifacts to pump up your Nettlecyst. And also, every artifact that keeps coming into play is jacking up the Dragonspark Reactor. So things are generating and happening quickly. Your board state can go from like not impressive to just full on, holy crap, crazy mode, party time, and you just vomit out your whole deck. And again, I'm still tweaking these numbers. I may find that these mana ramps are not necessary. I've only begun to start experimenting with this deck, but I've seen it already do some just disgusting things and disgusting turns that I've been so excited about it that I just wanted to get a video out and just get this concept at least out, so we can start discussing it and trying to push it further and innovating on it and what works best, because it's extremely fun and also powerful. And I think there's a little bit of maybe some competitive aspect to this deck for sure. So we talked about the Sleeper Dart. Again, Wedding Invitation is another cantripping artifact, but the ability on this one is actually extremely relevant. We've had Historic has a lot of 2cc artifacts that draw you a card, and I've identified these two as the best. I think for having actual like real competitive game application. Sleeper Dart, not so much, but it can be very useful to force your opponent to not be able to untap like a massive creature. Can be the difference of winning or losing. So that can be relevant. But the Wedding Invitation especially can just absolutely win you games. Of course, its ability, apart from drawing the card, is to tap, sacrifice to give target creature unblockable for the turn. That's huge on Nettlecyst. Again, a lot of the creatures in the deck have flying, so sometimes it's not even necessary. But maybe you haven't attached it to a flying creature, and it's just a big-ass germ. You got a 15/15 germ token out there or something. And, normally your opponent's just going to chump block it or whatever. But now you've got this Wedding Invitation. You can make it unblockable. And again, you're churning through so many cards. You're going to find these things. So it's extremely fun once you lower the casting cost of these artifacts. This stuff just comes down so quickly. And as we can see, almost the entire deck is artifact. Well, it is all artifacts, but they're artifacts that have colorless in the casting cost. So they're all being reduced. I mentioned we have 4 Foundry Inspectors. So we have 8 total copies of these reduction of artifact costs. Again, still play with the numbers. There is another 4cc artifact 2/2 flyer that reduces the cost as well. That could be viable here. I'm still playing with what the right number is. How many cantrips do you want versus cost reduction? Because you certainly want to reduce the cost so you can chain off with these things. But after about 2 or 3 of them, it becomes unnecessary. So it's still playing with what amount of redundancy do we really need to do this. Certainly 8 is a good start, and we can maybe add more if we feel we need more. Maybe we need to add more cantripping artifacts so we can just pop off even faster. I'm feeling maybe the Mind Stones aren't even necessary, and we would rather just have another cantripping artifact. But again, time will tell as I test this further. But this is a starting base concept. So again, we already talked about the 4 Nettlecysts. Just again, this and this primary win conditions by all means. Now we can get to some even more fun stuff. Going up to 4cc, 2 copies of Mystic Forge. So if we were talking about popping off and just blitzing through our whole deck and just playing artifacts for free and jacking up all these cards, Mystic Forge is an absolute engine to set this process off. 4 mana. Again, sometimes this is only costing you 2 colorless or even free, depending on how many of these things, these cost reducers you've gotten into play. But Mystic Forge is where the real party starts to get going. Once you have this out, now you're looking at the top card of your library. Anytime you can cast artifact spells from the top of your library. And if you have to, you can pay a life to exile the top card of your library. If you get jammed from comboing off and there's a land on top, you can use that. Remove the land and continue chaining. But with Mystic Forge and a ton of these cantripping things and all these artifacts that cost nothing because you've reduced their cost, you suddenly can just start ripping through your deck until you get blocked by your second consecutive land if you haven't played a land for turn. But so this thing could just absolutely, again, start the vomiting process of just blowing through cards and just littering out so much material onto the battlefield to power these things up. It gets insane quickly. It only takes a few of these things out to set this massive chain of events off. Admittedly, of course, our opponent, it can highly interact with these things and kill them. But there's a ton of redundancy and different ways we can build the deck to be more redundant. We'd even look at Emery, Lurker of the Lock, for finding the right pieces and having some more resiliency to get things back. But again, the first configuration of this deck, I've gone with only artifacts for just maximizing Nettlecyst and Reactor by running only artifacts in the deck. So 2 copies of Mystic Forge to just further that chain reaction. And then we also have another really spicy card in Panharmonicon. 4 colorless. If an artifact or creature entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So Panharmonicon is usually a card that has not really seen any serious competitive play because, of course, it fits into kind of that win more type of card where it's like, well, if you already have a lot of things like going off and triggers, like you're probably doing well already. And then if you draw this and you don't have something triggering, well, then it just sucks. 4 colorless, like that's kind of an investment. It's just kind of a newbie, like stupid, like just fun card, but not serious competitive potential. But I think in a deck like this, this thing can actually be out of control and just go insane very quickly because, again, we've got all this cost reduction. So normally 4 CC is kind of a lot to put in something into play that's not necessarily going to do anything right away. But again, when we have these reducers, and this thing only costs like 2, 3, even 1 mana, it's a piece of cake to put it in play. And this suddenly means that everything is doubling now. All of our sleeper darts and cantripping artifacts are doubling up. And suddenly, we're playing a free sleeper dart and we're drawing 2 cards. Or even you get 2 of these in play, you're drawing 3 cards because they stack. So again, playing with the numbers, I don't know what the right amount of this is yet. But maybe, again, we maybe need to shave down some of these mana rocks and they're not necessary, and it'd be better just to have more reducing effects so that we can combo off. And again, when you have like these things in play, the density of cantripping artifacts becomes more important if we want to just chain off as much as possible. So I don't know, this is a really intriguing card. It could just totally blow this deck up once you get going and doubling everything. And speaking of doubling everything, of course we have the all-star for artifact decks and Thought Monitor. 7 mana affinity for artifacts, 2/2 flyer, but the main reason we run this is the ETB effect of drawing 2 cards, which again, this is an artifact creature. So not only is it going to be reduced from the built-in affinity, but it's going to be reduced by these, our reducers. So this thing is very quickly going to only cost 1 blue, and then it's drawing you 2 more cards. So, and it's a 2/2 flyer to boot. So this is like one of the best cards in the deck, and probably the third. It's just a flying creature with Nettlecyst is kind of like your third route to victory, so to speak. But this is absolutely insane. I mean, Thought Monitor, drawing 2 cards with all this Panharmonicon bullshit going on. Now it's drawing 4 cards. Again, I'm not trying to, keep it real here. Like this is still able, your opponent can still interact and kill some of this stuff and stunt your initial growth. But again, I'm playing with these numbers. I'm curious to know what you guys think. Definitely comment. Let's talk about this. Let's get discussions, Reddit, whatever, and just try to find out what would the best way to configure like an artifact storm, as I'm calling this, deck be. I think this has already been an intriguing thing in the past, but now I think with this 2 mana cost 2/2 flyer that reduces the artifacts, we can start the reduction effect as very early and get this ball rolling. And it's just so insane because you don't need like a grape shot on the same turn when you chain all these spells, because they stay out there. They're not spells, they're artifacts that are all over the battlefield, and they matter for Dragonspark Reactor. Just being down in play, you're powering this up, even if you have to wait a turn before activating it and bombing the opponent for the win. But in addition, your Nettlecysts are just growing that much bigger. So you're just drawing an incredible amount of cards. In the few games I've tried this and been tweaking some of the cards, just getting ideas on what could work, and what the right density and proportions of each card type are. I have just, even in how not finely tuned this is yet, just in the stock build, I've had some crazy games of like, you have nothing in play, and then 2 turns later, after you've established 1 or 2 reducers, and you chain off, and suddenly you've got over 12 artifacts in play, and you've drawn just a boatload of cards, and you've got a massive Nettlecyst, as well as Dragonspark Reactors that are like a ticking time bomb, ready to just blow up the opponent in 1 or 2 activations of this. So it's really interesting. I think there could be something here, but we'll certainly have to tweak the numbers and continue experimenting with this. But that's the deck in a nutshell. Let me know what you think. I'd love to hear more ideas about how better to build this kind of archetype, whatever we want to call it. The lands aren't super crazy, just a lot of Izzet lands. Spire of Industry, of course, just easy blue-red land, basically, in an artifact deck. We do have a couple treasure vaults floating around. We don't need a ton of colored mana, so we can get away with sneaking a couple of these in there, just because it's an artifact land, and it can also make more artifacts. Again, just to jack up Nettlecyst and Dragonspark Reactor. And remember, this is artifacts entering the battlefield. It's not casting them. So sometimes you can just pop off a big vault for 2 or 3 tokens and jack up your reactors even that much more, or jack up the Nettlecyst more. So treasure vault's pretty sweet. But again, the lands aren't nothing super crazy, but there's a lot of other potential cards we can consider running in this. I've thought about like these kind of ultra enabling cards, the Panharmonicon and the Mystic Forge, what the right numbers for those are. Maybe they're more of like one-ofs, and maybe we do like a War of Invention type of deal where we're kind of like a toolbox artifact deck, and on demand maybe we can search up exactly what artifact we need with this. Again, War of Invention, piece of cake. Improvised spells are so easy in this deck because we have just a shitload of artifacts in play. We might want to run other improvised cards. We could make this deck a little bit more reactive and defensive with Metallic Rebuke. All-Star card, basically functions as a 1 mana leak in this deck. Of course, we'd be diluting our artifact count a little bit. So everything matters, and there's different. It depends on how we want to configure this, but certainly other things we could use are like reverse engineer, 2 blue. Basically, it's going to cost 2 blue just to draw 3 more cards to keep chaining artifacts in that way. You could see maybe running 1 or 2 of this. But again, the War of Invention is really intriguing. And the last food for thought I'll leave you with is another reducer we could run, potentially could be really good, would be Ugin the Ineffable. If we do decide, if you're building this deck and exploring this, and you decide that maybe as we explore this more, it turns out that all the mana rock and ramping isn't as important, or maybe it is. We leave it in. These could be good to cast Ugin the Ineffable more quickly, and obviously Ugin the Ineffable just a really good card by itself, but the synergy here would be absolutely insane. Ugin the Ineffable, of course, colorless spells you cast cost 2 less to cast, and it's got 2 great abilities as well. But the most intriguing thing is that this reduces things by 2 just by itself. So just with one Ugin the Ineffable and just a crap load of cantripy and artifacts, depending on what the right density is, of course, of those to run, you could absolutely chain and just dump so many artifacts into play. And again, once you have this effect online, you just keep dumping the artifacts from your deck until you hit a land, and you can't play that. But you're also drawing a card every time, so it's hard to strike out, especially if once you have Panharmonicon in play or the Mystic Forge, then it becomes almost like deterministic in that you can't strike out, because if you're drawing 2 cards a pop from these, then they're all free. That's just completely insane. And again, once I discover what the right exact density of certain cards to run, maybe it'll turn out that Panharmonicon is not even necessary, but it just seems like it can do a lot here. Maybe even running 4 of them isn't so insane if you're running a huge density of these things, and you're just playing them for free, because once you cast 1, now you're drawing 2. You're gonna find another one, and you're quickly gonna find every one of them, and you're gonna draw every card in your deck. And if that's the way we're going, then maybe something like the final kill spell, maybe then you do want to use just a grape shot, in the traditional Storm sense, and you just kill them with this, because you've cast so many spells, so many artifacts in the turn, and you just kill them with this. But it's a little bit more difficult to set up something like this. You've got to have, you have to have the 2 mana. It's not that hard, but for the moment, I'm exploring the artifact alone kill, because these, of course, already synergize with themselves because they are artifacts, where obviously Grape Shot is not. So the way it's configured right now, we're not doing anything like that. But those are some other cards you could consider with this that I'm certainly going to test. But I'm going to get going on this for the time being and just stick with the all artifact plan. And again, Metallic Rebuke, maybe that's a little bit more necessary, but this is kind of like a best of 1 build, just looking to pop off with the combos as fast as possible. But that's the deck, at least the concept of it anyways. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I'd love to discuss this further. I'd love recommendations on the list, as well as other card choices that I haven't mentioned that could absolutely be huge here. Let me know what you think of it. If you happen to try something like this, share your list with me. I'd love to see what this thing can do, but a lot of these cards are just too powerful to ignore. So I think there could be something here, and I'm excited to explore this with the rest of the community. So if you've made it to this far, I really appreciate you watching the video to the end. Again, consider liking and subscribing if you aren't already, and I very much appreciate it. Hope you like the deck. If you play ladder, good luck on it, as always, and peace.